So good morning, beautiful, sparkly people.
Good morning.
I want to talk to you today about the eternal playground. Now, I bet you're wondering what I have in this little bag. Well, I brought a little friend who's going to help me tell you all about the eternal playground. This is Jojo.
Jojo.
Hi, Jojo.
Jojo is not just a soft monkey. Jojo is a super monkey. He likes to be called super monkey. He likes to be called super silly, but then he realized that there's a word supercilious, and he thought maybe he was a supercilious monkey. And then I had to explain to him that that means arrogant, and he said, arrogant? Arrogant is ridiculous. No wonder they call it super silly. So Jojo's just going to hang out with me here while I do my talk today. There you go.
Oh, I love him.
My little friend. Now, although he doesn't say much when other people are around, Jojo does remind me quite often to relax, to lighten up, to enjoy life, to smile, to laugh, and to not be so serious and grave and dour even when the circumstances seem like I really should be. Jojo's been with me for several years now. He came with me all the way from Manitoba to BC, and he lived at my work when I worked for the BC government. He lived at my work for most of the time there. And you know, at work I would sometimes have this feeling that life was really serious. You know, I'd sometimes forget the divine silliness that was woven into the fabric of life. And so Jojo was there, like all sock monkeys, you know, Jojo is really skilled at silliness. That's his thing. He is very skilled at silliness. And so when I began to feel a little bit too serious, Jojo would do things like climbing up the filing cabinet, or sitting on my little cubicle wall, or sometimes adventuring over the cubicle wall into the other person's cubicle next to me, or he'd hang from my shelves, or even from the ceiling brackets occasionally. He'd do all sorts of silly things just to remind me that it's okay to smile. Silliness, Jojo tells me, is very godly. It's very divine, he says. And it must be cultivated purposefully in order for us to expand our consciousness of that inner divinity that we all are, which Jojo says is simply another word for the divine playground, for that eternal playground. And Jojo even found a quote that, you know, would help me understand what he meant by this. And I thought this was a really great quote. It's by Alan Watts. And Alan Watts says, it's interesting that Hindus, when they speak of the creation of the universe, they do not call it the work of God. They call it the play of God. The Vishnu Leela, Leela meaning play. And they look upon the whole manifestation of all the universe as play, as a sport, as a kind of a dance. Well, Jojo knows that there are many, many ways that we can invite this divine playground into our lives. And so I thought I would just, you know, impart some of Jojo's wisdom for you today. So the first thing Jojo knows is that creativity is play. And I think, you know, any artist would tell you that. But Jojo has a particular sense of what that means. Eons and eons ago, even before the beginning of time, Creator pulled some stardust from out of the very center of its heart, and it began to make it into things, to play with it, to create from it. And it wanted to create the most beautiful and amazing and joyful, playful things with this divine stardust. Well, imagine the excitement of the divine when it discovered that by imparting its consciousness into these little objects that it made, the tiny ants and the great big galaxies, when it imparted its consciousness into its creation could play as well. Imagine how beautiful and wonderful the creative process became when the divine saw and witnessed the creation itself beginning to play, to create, to continue the creative process. It's like the gift that keeps on giving. The divine creates something, and that something creates and creates and creates, and plays just like the divine does. You know, it's kind of like the difference between playing with a robot made out of Lego and then graduating to a robot that actually walks and talks. Or even better, a puppy that like wags its tail and barks and bounces around. This is what the divine must have felt like when it saw that when it imparted its consciousness to us, that we would unfold that same divinity, that same creativity into our lives, and that we would continue to create from there. It's consciousness animating life. That's what it is. Well, Jojo says that when we create anything in our lives, we create from the same faculties and energy and power that the divine used from that very first moment of creating the universe. We are sparks of the divine fire. And so when we create that reality of our lives, we can create from that same joyful playfulness as the divine has done. Every new idea we bring into manifestation is just as powerful as the supernovas created by the divine. Every new thought that we have expands outward and creates ripples in the fabric of the universe, just like the divine does when it thinks a thought and creates everything. Wouldn't it be great if we could create in our lives with that same joy, with that same playfulness as the divine has? And we can, of course, because that's our birthright. It's our birthright to create, just like Spirit creates. So Jojo knows that curiosity is a play too. I once asked Jojo why monkeys do crazy things. Because monkeys do some pretty crazy things. Well, Jojo says they're all just curious. They're curious about everything. You know, what does the world look like from the top of that tree? Why is it so dusty under the bed? What would it feel like if the dog picked you up and slobbered on you as it walked away with you? What would it feel like to adventure into the next cubicle? Or to crawl into a filing cabinet, maybe? They're curious about absolutely everything. All of these things spark curiosity in the mind of a little sock monkey because there's so much they don't know, and there's so much they want to know. Just like there's so much that we don't know, and there's so much we could know if we were just curious. Well, Jojo reminds me that curiosity is divine. Sometimes it's good to travel a different road, just to see what it looks like from maybe the other side of the river or the other side of the mountain. It's good to be curious, and it's good to be fearless with our curiosity. There have been times when I have sort of tempered my natural curiosity because of fear. Because I didn't know if, doing this new thing that I thought I would like to do, maybe it'll just be a waste of time and I'll be disappointed that I spent time doing that. Or maybe the new people I meet along the way won't like me so much. Or maybe, if it's a new restaurant, maybe I just won't like their food. So I don't know, I don't really want to go there if I'm going to be disappointed. Or maybe I want to try a new activity, but I'm not sure if I'd be good at it. So, those sorts of discomforts, the fear of looking foolish, or fear of failure, or fear of disappointment, or of rejection, all of these fears seem to me at times to be really good reasons not to follow my natural curiosity. Well, Jojo happens to think that all of my good reasons are patently ridiculous, and he thinks I should follow my curiosity more. Jojo might sometimes get himself into some predicaments when he's curious, like for instance the one time when he was climbing into the filing cabinet and the door closed, so he was sort of half in, half out of the filing cabinet. He got himself into a bit of a predicament there, but he had fun doing that anyhow because he learned. He learned what happens when you crawl into the filing cabinet without the door being all the way open. And he didn't stress about looking ridiculous or silly or anything. you know, he just sort of laughed along with it. And when I giggled as I was pulling him out, he wasn't embarrassed about that or anything. He just giggled along with me because, you know, he knew it must have looked pretty silly. Like, that looks pretty silly. So he laughed too. Curiosity and learning go a long way to expanding our consciousness. And having a good sense of humor along with that goes a long way to expanding our sense of joy and play in our lives. Jojo is silly. He is just plain silly. But you know what he says? He says that silliness is the highest form of wisdom. Just ask the laughing Buddha. So there you have it. Jojo knows that experimentation is play. Jojo says that life is full of opportunities to see what will happen if. What will happen if I go this way instead of that way? What will happen if I decide to do this instead of that? What will happen if I decide to change my thoughts, to change my thinking? Well, you know, when we first started, Steph and I first started in our first Science of Mind class, our teacher told us to experiment with the ideas of affirmations and setting intentions and spiritual mind treatment. He told us to experiment with those ideas by working on small demonstrations first, like rock star parking maybe, or manifesting a butterfly or a purple dinosaur into our experience. So that's what we did. We were all beginners. We didn't know the power of our own intentions or the power of our word. But what we did was we played with it. We experimented with doing a spiritual mind treatment or setting an intention just to see what would happen if. And what would happen, what did happen, were wonderful and amazing things. And isn't that what we should do with all of our intentions, always? You don't just have to be a beginner to experiment and play with things. We should be doing that with all of our lives. Jojo tells me that experimentation is the foundation of creation. He says that that's how the divine works through us. That we have this idea, this divine idea, that we want to see what will happen if. And so we do that. And through the divine eyes, what happens next is always wondrous and amazing. When we open ourselves to the innate magic and wonder within the creative intelligence, we can see how our intentions always unfold more perfectly, more amazing, and more wondrously than we could have even imagined. Jojo says the trick is to expect to be amazed. Expect to be amazed. Expect to be astounded by the brilliance of the divine unfolding around you. And then you will always uncover diamonds, even when you're only digging in the sandbox. You'll always uncover the most amazing things. When you expect that you will find amazing and wonderful things as you mix together your potion of intention and gratitude, when you have a high expectation for that, you will always be amazed. You will always have wonderful and amazing things happen in your life. And living your life in a state of joy and amazement is bliss. And Jojo says that this is our reason for being. Well, actually what he said was it's a sock monkey's reason for being, but I think it's sort of implied that it's all of our reasons for being. Jojo knows that adventure is play. Jojo's adventure over the cubicle wall into the next person's cubicle was kind of reminded me of my childhood. You know, he was a fearless explorer going to find out what was in the next cubicle. Well, when I was a kid, walking home from school in the middle of winter, in the deep of winter, as they say, in Winnipeg, could have been torturous. It was cold, and I sometimes had snow up to my knees. But you know, winter is no reason for a child to stop playing. And so, as I was walking that 2 blocks, maybe it was, from my school to my home, I was no longer walking on a quiet residential sidewalk. No, I was an Arctic explorer. I was fearlessly exploring the Arctic, searching for the dangerous and elusive polar bear, or maybe the wily and eccentric Arctic fox, or perhaps the beautiful and mysterious Arctic seal. I would be walking along and I'd find a stick, and I'd pick up the stick and take it with me, because then when I arrived at my destination of the North Pole, I would plant my flag and claim this Arctic wonderland for my own. Now, some people said that I was just daydreaming, or that I had my head in the clouds all the time. But playing as I walked didn't make me less present to my surroundings. In fact, I would say I was more keenly present than ever to the crunching of the snow beneath my feet, or that cold blast of winter wind across my face, or the way that frost gathered on my scarf. I was more present than ever, and because I was so present, I saw everything differently. I saw everything with the eyes of wonder, because that's what happens when you're present. So I would have similar adventures like this in the spring and summer as I explored my neighborhood, as I chased after trying to catch squirrels and robins and fairies and gnomes. When you're a child, the whole world is magical. Well, Jojo reminds me that the world is always magical, even as an adult. It's just that I don't always pay attention. I'm not always present. How often do we as adults really see the magic in our everyday lives? How often do I take time to be present and to notice that there is a world parliament of robins congregating in my front lawn? They could be talking about all kinds of amazing stuff, like evolution of the robin or philosophy of the robin, while they're having their feast of grubs and worms. I wouldn't know. I'm not present enough for that. How often am I present enough as I walk down by the lake to see that there's a fleet of tiny leaf boats that is leaving the shore, that are traveling off to explore new lands into the lake? How often am I present enough as I'm walking through the park to really notice that there's a whole civilization of ants building tiny little pyramids to honor their noble rulers? How often are we really that present? When I'm not present for those small adventures in my life, how can I prepare for and be present for the really grand adventures? Steph and I took a little adventure this past week with some friends. We went on a little ferry to go across the river. It's the very first time that we've been on one of these little cable ferries, and we went across the river and explored the little community of Glade. This was the very first time that we'd been on that other side of the river, to see things from a different perspective. How wonderful was that? And while we were there, our adventure took us on a trail over a happy little bubbling stream, and then into this fairy forest covered in thick plush moss. And it was beautiful, and it was magical. It was an adventure. Jojo reminds me that all of life is magical and wondrous, that every day should be an adventure, and that as I adventure, I really am living from my joy. I'm living from the innate truth of my being that is pointing me in the direction of my purpose, because my purpose resides within the deep joy within me. Jojo says that adventure is the way to one's highest self. Well, and besides that, Jojo also says that without adventure, life is boring. And to a sock monkey, that's really his definition of hell. Jojo knows that dreaming is play. Jojo loves to dream. Now, his favorite kind of dreaming is just daydreaming, where his thoughts sort of roll effortlessly from one idea to another, and there really isn't any purpose to it or any intention behind it. It's just kind of fun. But Jojo taught me that when we dream, when we vision our lives, our goals and our dreams, that we are still playing. So even as we just envision what it is that we are setting into intention, We are playing. We're playing in that divine playground. Steph and I sometimes play this game where we visualize having already arrived at whatever it is we're setting into intention. So we start off by saying, isn't it great that? And then we fill it in with this fantastic story about how great it is to have arrived already at that place that we have envisioned for ourselves. So we bring what we're envisioning into the present, into this moment, into our hearts and into our joy. And so we might say something like, isn't it great that this community has grown so large and so prosperous that we are right now putting the finishing touches on our very own building, and we've put such love and such intention and such beauty into our own sacred space. Isn't it great? And then after one of us has said, and isn't it great, then the other one will join in and say, yeah, and isn't it great that, and then we'll make it even bigger and wider and deeper and more detailed. And we'll expand our vision. And it's fun. It's joyful. It's play. And it is a powerful tool for bringing ourselves into that feeling space, that beautiful feeling space of what it is that we choose to bring into our lives. And this is how the divine knows what to create for us. It doesn't create the thing, it creates the feeling. It wants to create for us what we feel. Feeling is the fuel, it's the power behind creation. Jojo loves this game. He loves it when we play, isn't it great that? And he reminds me that if I spent a little bit more time playing this game every day, that I would be putting some powerful intentions into play, unintended, and that would have some dramatic effects on the way life is expressing around me. Jojo says that Creator plays this game all the time in order to bring the universe into being, and he thinks it's just ridiculous when I don't join in the fun. Jojo knows there's nothing more eternal than play. As human beings, we have spent so much of our history in search of the road to heaven, to eternal life. You know, all religions have some sort of reference to this eternality of spirit, whether you call it heaven or nirvana or enlightenment or oneness or bliss. All religions have some sort of an expression of this. And Jojo says that when we cultivate play in our lives, we find that eternality of spirit right where we're at, because when we cultivate that sense of play, we are uncovering the wonder that we are. We are that sense of play. We are that wonder. We are the creativity of spirit. We are the eternality of spirit. And so as we enter into that joy that is the eternal playground, we are uncovering the divine within us, and we are uncovering the bliss that is within us as we create our lives through play. So yes, silliness and joy and play are very sacred to a little sock monkey. And I have much to learn from my little friend here. Whether you have a Jojo in your life or not, I wish you joy and play in your life. And so today, after the service, after we have our town hall meeting, I invite you and encourage you to go out and play. I love you and I bless you.